Hi, on this week's video I will be building a project that I've been looking forward for a while. I'm going to make myself a new desk. And just like with almost every other project that I make, we start by rough cutting some birch boards into rough size so we can start milling them down. On the previous projects I've done this with a circular saw, but a few projects ago I got myself a miter saw and it has made the rough cutting super easy. In the beginning, I said that I've been looking forward for this project for a while. It's not that I don't have a desk, but the desk I have we got for a package of coffee, which in Finland is roughly €5. And the desk isn't the worst desk at all, but just isn't our style and doesn't really fit the purpose. It was probably a super nice desk maybe 25 years ago, but more on that a little bit later. Now that I have all the boards milled up that I need for the panels, it's time to start making some glue-ups. I know that there's been some discussions on whether it's needed to alternate the grain pattern on the boards when you do panel glue-ups, but I still like to alternate mine just to make sure that they would stay flat throughout some years. And to try to make as flat panels as I can, I use the in and out method to make sure that the edges that are facing each other match perfectly. And here's the desk that I've been using for the past 2.5 years. As you can see, it's not the nicest, but it does what it's needed to do. And like I said, it was probably a super nice desk 25 years ago. It even has this feature for the super big monitors that we used to have back in the day, that you could move the platform up and down to make sure that the monitor is at the level you want it to be. We recently painted our house during this summer, and I found out that the paint scrapers are really good tools for scraping off the glue from the panels. Now that I had most of the panels glued up and ready, it was time to start gluing up the pieces for the legs, because I want them to be a bit more thicker than the boards that are 2 centimeters. And while I have the legs drying up, it was time to start flattening the panels, and as usual I don't have wide enough planer, so it's time to do some hand planing. Luckily I've gotten better at making the panels and sharpening and setting up my hand plane, so this isn't as big of a job as it used to be. But the good thing with hand planing is, now that winter is coming and the winters in Finland are rather cold, and we have a fireplace and a wood heated sauna, I can use the shavings from the hand planing to light up the fires on both. And as some returning viewers might notice, I've gotten myself a new tool. I've been using the battery powered Makita sander for the few years that I've been woodworking. It's been really nice, but the issue is that the batteries die quite quickly, and then the power that you get from the sander obviously reduces. So I've been meaning to get coated one so the power stays good for the whole duration, because let's face it, in many cases you have to sand for hours. And I've been thinking between the Festool and this bit cheaper Makita one, and ended up with this Makita. The one downside that I faced with this one is the dustboard connection. The connection is really bad, the hose doesn't stay on, but I was able to fix this later on with a pipe clamp. I found these quick release ones, and then I didn't have to have this clamp set up to have the hose come parallel to the table so it would stay on. Basically the Makita model is somewhat similar to Festool's Rodex. It has the same forced rotation mode, which is really good when I'm rough sanding the panels to make them smooth after the hand planing. So that was really good function on that, and I think that the Makita goes for about half of the price of the Festool, and that was one of the main reasons why I ended up going with Makita, because I don't really want to put that much money on the sander at this point. And now, some of you might be thinking that these panels don't really look like the tabletop for a desk. And you're right, they don't. If you look the thumbnail of the video closely, you probably noticed that it's not just a normal desk. The desk will be L-shaped and it has a cabinet under one of the wings. And unlike the previous boxes for cabinets that I've made and used butt joints, on this one I decided to go with miter joints because I think that looks way nicer, and to be honest, it's not as hard to do as I used to think, and I would guess many of you do as well. The cabinet will have two sections on it. The upper one, just a drawer, and then below that there will be a door with movable shelf. Previously, I've been doing these joints mostly with dowels, but this time I decided that I would use the router and the level as a fence to route out a dado. So once the side panels were ready, it was time to cut the one side of the divider straight, then using the fence on the table saw to cut it to size, and remembering to add enough extra to the width of the panel so I can cut the corresponding pieces for the dado joints on this one as well. And to make sure that the fit was almost perfect, I used a scrap piece of wood to first dial out the table saw to make the cuts the right size. Once I was happy with the fit on the scrap piece, it was time to move on to the actual divider and cut out the joints here as well. And as I had to take my riving knife out from the table saw, it was also a good time to cut out the back panel grooves on the panels on the cabinet. I'm just using some 6mm birch plywood as the back panel on this one. Then I had to measure out the depth for the divider. I will inset the divider about a centimeter into the cabinet because I will be adding an edge profile to the inside edge of the cabinet. And once that was done, it was time to finish up the joints, and because these are stop dados, I need to cut out pieces from the divider so the divider would fit in. And for me, it was easiest to do this with a handsaw. I've seen a lot of videos on Instagram from the Temple tool, which is the brand from Chris from the Third Coast Craftsman in YouTube. I've been meaning to try some of his saws because I am in a need of a proper flush trim saw. So if any of you have any experience with those, let me know down in the comments. And before I could start assembling the cabinet, I wanted to fill out a knot that I had on one of the panels. So I drilled out a hole and then just inserted a plug in it, and that was the fix. I did make sure that this is on the inside and on the back end of the cabinet, so you can't really see it. And as it is much easier to sand the insides of the cabinet now, before the assembly, I took the time and did the sanding now, and then it was time to start moving on to the assembly. I've had the bad habit of not taking the time to properly tape out the glue joints that I'm gluing up, because I'm always thinking that it takes too much time, but then once I start cleaning up the glue ups, I realized that cleaning up the joints takes much longer than doing the taping. So on this one, I took the time, taped out all the joints, so any squeeze out would be just on the tapes and the cleanup would be super simple, and I don't have to waste time on trying to clean out the joints on inside of the cabinet after the glue up. And one good note on this is that it's good to remove the tape before the glue has fully cured. So maybe half an hour, 45 minutes after you've done the glue up, come and remove the tapes. The glue is still a bit soft, so it comes off really easy. So, now that the cabinet frame was done, it was time to start making the drawer to the top part of the cabinet. I will be making the drawer from hardwood, so the same birch that I'm using for the whole build I will also use for the drawer. And funnily enough, I actually haven't installed drawer slides before, so this is the first build that I'm using actual drawer slides, and I'm using the bottom mounted ones that I found. And I must say that the instructions and the diagrams that they sent out weren't the easiest ones to read, but with some proper thinking, I was able to understand them and figure out what I'm supposed to do. I was planning to use the Plum undermount slides, but those seem to be really hard to find in Finland, but I found a brand that has a pretty similar product, so I ordered those. For the drawer, I'm using rapid joints because that's a super easy way to make hardwood drawers, and I will be using some plugs to add some contrast to the sides and to make it super strong. To make the assembly and the finish super easy, I cut the bottom panel groove first on the 3 pieces and then raised the table saw blade high enough to cut off the piece from the back panel, so then I can just slide the bottom panel in, and then it makes the whole process much easier than if you would have the bottom panel on once you glue it up. Now I can just slide the bottom panel in once I'm done with the finishing and use a couple of screws to tie it up to the back piece. Then, as I said, I will be adding some dowels to the sides to make the joints super strong and to add some contrast. And to make the dowels, I have this steel plate that I've drilled an 8mm hole to it, and then I will just use a hammer and smack down this piece of walnut through it, and then I have an 8mm dowel. And my piece was a bit too big at the beginning, but I shaved off some of the corners off with the hand plane, and then it was much easier to whack through the plate. I mentioned earlier about adding the edge profile to the inside edge of the cabinet. For that I'm just using chamfering bit and routing out the edge, and then finishing off the corners and the section with the divider with a chisel to make it all look like the same. And I think it's details like this that makes this stand out from just a store-bought cabinet. But while I'm doing that, I think it's a good time to remind you that if you are enjoying the video, please leave it a like. It helps it to spread out to more people. And if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel as well. Now that the drawer glue up was ready, it was time to start adding the pins to the sides, so just drilling out a hole and then inserting the dowels that we made a bit earlier. And like I said earlier, I'm in a dire need of a proper flush cut trim saw, so let me know if you have any experience with the Temple tool ones. Then it was time to install the bottom panel, just adding a few countersink screws, and then we could move on to attaching the drawer slide hardware. The good thing on building the drawer this way is also that you don't have to make the cutout to the back piece for the drawer slides, which you would have to do if you had the back panel be the same way as the other pieces are. And based on what I've seen online, I think the hardware that I have is pretty similar to the Plum ones. The installation is pretty identical, and I think with both you are supposed to attach the pieces that come to the bottom of the drawer so that they are in contact with the front panel that you have on the drawer, but I didn't want to do that, so I attached them to the frame of the drawer. Then for the cabinet door and the drawer face, I made this one big panel because I want the crane to continue even with the divider in between, so it looks that they are from the same piece. Then once I had the other side cut straight with the correct AccuCut sled, I used the table saw to cut the panel to the final width. After that, I just cut out the piece for the drawer face, and then the bottom piece would be for the cabinet door. And it doesn't matter if the cabinet door isn't the right size yet, because I can just trim it from the bottom once I know what size it needs to be. And the same is with the drawer face, I can just cut something off from the top, so the crane continues between the two pieces. I'm using the hinges from the same company as the drawer slides. I think the company is called DTC, and I got these hinges for inset doors from them. They didn't come with any instructions, so I kind of did some guessing on how much they should be inset for the hinges, and I think I had the correct jig set at 5mm, and that seemed to work pretty well. But in general, I think it's pretty weird that since Bloom is from Europe, it seems to be really impossible as a consumer to get the hardware from them. In Finland, I think Finland has one importer for those, and they do mostly just business to business sales. So it's really hard to get those. I think there would be an option to order them from Germany or somewhere, but then that's a bit more trickier than just buying them somewhere in Finland. And because I have the chamfer on the inside edge of the cabinet, I have to make sure that the door sits in deep enough so it's aligned with the edge of the chamfer and not with the edge of the cabinet. And to see how deep I need to attach the hinges, I used a scrap piece to align the edge of the what would be the door with the edge of the chamfer. After a few adjustments, I was able to get the door closing in nicely. When it comes to the adjustments on the hinges and the drawer slides, I think those are also pretty identical with the Blum ones. I mentioned earlier that there would be this movable shelf inside the cabinet, and to drill some holes for the shelf pins, I made this handy jig from one of the scrap pieces that I had laying around and just drilled some 5mm holes. I think I had the distance set to be 3 centimeters, which in some way was set to be kind of the standard for this kind of thing. Not that it matters, but at least it feels right. I know that the Craig has the shelf pin jig available as well, and I might get it at some point because I have some built-in cabinets that I need to build at some point, but for this one-time use I just went with the one that I did myself. I've made some solid wood cabinet doors previously on few of the cabinets that I've made, and because in Finland we have the true 4 seasons, so the humidity changes a lot throughout the year, I've noticed that they have some warp to them during some seasons. So for these ones I decided that I will add these small pieces to the inside of the door and also to the bottom of the movable shelf. So I'm hoping that that would prevent some of the warping. The bolts that I bought for the cabinet door and the drawer, I need to cut out a small groove so it will sit flush with the edge of the drawer face and the cabinet door so that they don't stick out and prevent the door or the drawer from closing. Once I had done the majority of the cuts on the table saw, it was time to take out the chisel and finish the cut, and then with a router route out a slot to the back side of the drawer face so I can have this sitting flush with the drawer. Then to have even spacing around the whole drawer face, I used some playing cards to kind of even it out, and I would know how many cards I would have to have on each side to make it even. Then I added some painter's tape to the front of the drawer and the back side of the drawer face and some super glue and used the playing cards to align the face and temporarily attach it to the drawer so I could drill it in through the inside of the drawer. Once this was done, the cabinet part of the build is almost done. I still need to do the base for the cabinet, but I won't do it yet so I can measure out how tall it needs to be to have the height on the cabinet matching the base of the table. If you remember, we glued up the leg pieces earlier on the video, and now it was time to start milling those up to have them on the final dimensions. For me, the dimensions would be 4 centimeters times 6, and I will be adding some tapers to the ends of the legs as well. Once I had all the leg pieces milled up, it was time to start cutting out the other pieces for the base, which I hadn't done earlier. So first, rip cutting all the rough cut pieces that I had, and then cutting them to size, and then I would have all the pieces and I could kind of set up the table base to visualize it a bit. I said that I will add taper to the leg pieces, but I will also add a taper to the end piece on one of the ends of the table. This jig that I built a few projects ago to make these taper cuts has been really nice because I've used it on multiple projects ever since I made it. It was super easy to make and it's easy to use, and with the hold down clamps that I have, it makes sure that you don't have to have your fingers close to the table saw blade, so it makes making the taper cuts super safe as well. I think I show you how to make this on the launcher video. If you are interested, go and check that one out as well. For the joints on the table base, I just went with dowels. I thought that that's the most easiest way to make all the joints with butt joints and inserting dowels to there. It doesn't really have to have any real strength on that direction. It just has to support the tabletops and kind of hold the whole table together. So first drilling out the holes for the dowels to each of the ends that needed them, then using these doweling pins and marking down the corresponding hole locations on the other sides of the pieces. In addition to the dowel joints, I will be making one half lap joints to one of the longer pieces that are crossing each other. I wanted to have them this way so it would add some rigidity to the whole base. And to cut down the half lap joints, I just used the table saw as that was the easiest way to do it for me. Then, before I glued the whole thing up, I did one dry assembly to see that everything fits together properly and there wouldn't be any surprises when I'm doing the glue up because there are so many joints, so I want to be sure that everything fits as it should. Once I had checked that everything fits as it should, it was just time to do the glue up. And for this one, as some of the pieces are so long, I had to get some pipe connectors for the pipe clamps that I have to attach two of the pipes together, so I would have long enough clamp for this. And this is also one of the good sides with the pipe clamps because you can easily make them longer than they are rather than just buying super expensive long clamps. Now that I had the base assembled, this was the first time that I would actually see and kind of feel out how big of the table would actually be, because so far I've only kind of had it on computer and paper and not really seen what the real size would be. With the base assembly done, it was time to move back to work on the legs. Now I needed to cut the legs to the right size, so first squaring off one end, then using the stop block on the sliding fence that I have on my table saw to cut all the legs except for one to the same size. And now you might be wondering why one of the legs isn't cut to the same length as the others, and that is because the front edge leg that I have on the table, that will be in a slight of an angle, and the length has to be a bit different from the others to adjust for the angle as well. But before we get to that, I got the tapers to the legs as I mentioned before, again using the taper trick that I have, and that makes it not just safe and easy, but this makes repeating the same taper for all the legs super easy as well. Then for the joints to attach the legs to the base, I will use what I think is called a lap joint. So I will cut part of the leg away to then inset to the base, and then to strengthen the joints I will add some screws and then add dowels to plug the holes eventually. I got most of the material off with the table saw, and then to get rid of the table saw marks I used the chisel to clear out all the faces. Then back to the one leg that will be at an angle. So for this I had to put the base to upright so I could lay out the leg that would be angled, mark down in what angle I would need to do the cuts, and then do the first cut for the joint before I could cut the leg to the proper length. All the cuts for this leg I did with the miter saw because that's the easiest to set for this specific angle, but I don't usually do the final cuts on any of the pieces with my miter saw because the blade isn't that good. I've been meaning to order a new blade with more teeth on it so it would make a finer cut so I could use it for finished cuts as well. Once I had all the legs finished, I wanted to add these leveling feet to the legs, even though I'm pretty sure that the legs are level, but I'm not sure if the floor where this will become is level or if we will move anywhere and the table would move places if the floors at the new place would be fully level. So just to be sure, I wanted to add some simple leveling feet that I countersunk into the leg, so then if one or two of the legs don't sit properly, I can just level them out with these and the table won't be rocking all around the floor. Because I think it's pretty common that the floors on houses, especially on wooden houses, leave a little, so it might be that they are not always 100% level. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm just attaching the legs with some wood glue and to reinforce them with some screws. And before anyone jumps out of the chair, I will be plugging the holes so you won't see the screw holes underneath the table, and they are underneath the tabletop, so you would have to crawl under the table to even see the plugs. And I don't know why you would be crawling under my table. So yeah. Then as the inside corner of the table doesn't have any structure holding it upright, because I don't want to put leg in there because that would just be in the way, I will be adding these support pieces to two of the back corner legs, so that will add some support to the inside corner as well, and then the table should be a bit more sturdy than it would be without them. And again with this, I will just attach these with some wood glue and some screws and plug them in again. And if you ever see the plugs, I don't know what you are doing under my table. As the table only has 5 legs and 3 of those being on the back corner, 2 of those being on one of the ends, I need something to support the other end of the table as well. And for that, I'm attaching the table base to the cabinet, and then through the table base and through the cabinet, I will attach those to the tabletop with some threaded inserts and bolts. So I drilled some oversized holes to both the base and to the top of the cabinet. Then I can just put the bolts from inside the cabinet all the way through to the tabletop, and that will then secure the whole thing together. And as you saw, the table base only reaches to the almost halfway through the cabinet. So to add support to the other end of the cabinet, I'm adding these small spacers there. But we are still missing one important piece from the whole project. If you remember, I earlier mentioned that I haven't built the base for the cabinet yet because I needed to check how tall the table base would end up to be. And now that we know that, it's time to build the base for the cabinet so we can have that finished. For the build, I'm just going with really simple approach, adding these legs that I will cut some tapers with the handsaw, and then attaching some pieces to connect all the legs. Then I can just screw the base into the cabinet throughout the pieces that connect the legs to one another. And just like with the legs on the table base, I added the leveling feet to the base of the cabinet as well, just in case if something needs to be leveled out. Now that all the other parts for the table are ready, it's time to start finishing up the tabletops. So first using the correct AccuCut jig again to cut the tables to proper length. And as the tabletop consists of two pieces due to the L shape, I had to figure out a way to connect the two pieces together in addition of attaching them to the base. And the solution that I figured out was that I will just have two scrap pieces and I will make holes to them, add threaded inserts to the undersides of the tabletops, and then bolt them in with these. And then I will have also some adjustability to try to pull them in together. And as the holes are a bit oversized, give some space for seasonal movement as well. Now for the tri-assembly, I didn't have the right length bolts at home, so I needed to add some extra washers to sit there in between. But for the final build, I will get some proper bolts that will be the right size. Now that I have the tabletops attached to each other, I could mark down where to drill the threaded inserts in to the underside so I could attach the cabinet to the tabletop. Once we have that done, we only have a few more things to do before we can get to the finishing of the project finally. I will use these L brackets to attach the tabletop to the base. I know that a lot of you guys in the States use the C-clips, but for whatever reason, those are not really available in Europe. So the L bracket it is, and the good thing is that they are under the table, behind the table base. No one will ever see them, unless again you are under my table, but then what in the earth are you doing there? Then one final thing before some final sanding is to add the edge profile to the tabletop, and I'm again using the chamfer bit to add a chamfer to the underside of the table. Then just removing all the hardware from all the pieces, and even though all of you like watching a lot of sanding, I won't be showing you the final route even though I have the new sander. Instead, we will just jump straight to the finishing, and yet again I'm using Rubio Monocode on the color of Mist 5% as I've done with the few last projects that I have made. I think the color works really nice on birch. Once the finish had cured few days, it was time to add the final touch, adding the maker's mark to the side of the drawer and attaching all the hardware back to the drawers and other parts, and then just to assemble the table. I must say that I really like the new desk that I have. I'm here now recording in front of it. It's visually much more nicer than the old one. It has much more space, and it's nice to know that I've made it myself. And the unfortunate fact is that I do have to spend quite many hours a week in front of the desk due to my day job, so at least it's nice that I like the desk that I have now. I think the next steps that I have to do for this room where the table is that I need to change the flooring so it matches to the other parts of the house, add some acoustic panels to the wall facing me when I'm doing the voiceovers, and then I want to do some new built-in cabinets to the backside where the white cabinets are. And of course then paint the walls as well. But if you made this far into the video, thank you for watching and I'll see you on the next one.